Hello, and welcome to Exploring Axon, a podcast where we discuss Axon Framework, Axon Server, and their ecosystem. I am your host and a software developer at AxonIQ, Sarah Torrey. Welcome to the second part of my conversation with Steve Randolph, the founder and CEO of Harbormaster. I hope you enjoy the rest of the talk, and let's have a listen. So really cool detail things that you come up with and you came up with, and that's really valuable.
What's funny is I think a lot of that comes from, once upon a time, I was an enterprise architect. And what we like at that level is predictability, right? We don't control, the ones and zeros, and we're not there really grinding through code reviews, et cetera, but predictability, right? So when we actually say something, we would know from an architecture perspective, it would become pervasive throughout the landscape in terms of new development, at least, right? But because we never had any control over that, right? We would have a document that they would show us as a team and say, hey, here's our intent from an architecture perspective. And we look and say, okay, does it have all the abilities in it, right? Scalability and all these other things. And we look and say, that kind of does, but we had no way of assuring it can, right? So
Yeah.
one of the bigger cells I've always found is enterprise architects, chief architects who understand, they think it's cool that the tool can do the tool kind of things, right, at the low level. But what they like is predictability. It's like, so everybody who starts a new project and uses this tech stack, they'll be starting from the same place. It's like, we don't have that today. You might have, a common Maven repository and a common Docker file and some other little common things, but no. So when you, to your point, going from team to team interaction and or a person going from team to team, there's really not that same level of predictability, right? In terms of how this thing is built, what got generated, how it works, etc. So when you can have that and you can modify it before you actually generate, I don't know. I mean, I'm not tooting my own horn, but that's pretty cool.
That's priceless. I think so, and I think the other benefit of it that I see is that if you're onboarding a new team member into your team, then they can actually go look at that properties file and get a lot of information about the structure of this application they're working on. And I think that's really extremely valuable for somebody who's new to this project, who's new to this. You open up your IntelliJ, for instance, and you're like, oh, what's happening? What are these files? How's the structure of the project itself? You can go and get that information, and I think that's extremely beneficial for somebody who's new to the team and come in and kind of trying to find their way through this maze of files and packages and things like that. And also in terms of deployment, because you also touched on that, there's a lot of information, there's a lot of things that they can do and modify. So tell me a little bit about that also.
Yeah, so thank you. I didn't really go into that. So we have a single YAML file. So you get the property file and it says, hey, here's where I want these files to go, right?
Yeah.
But before you even get to that, we have what's called a project as code YAML file. And in that simple YAML file, just like you would with a Docker file or even a Kubernetes YAML file, you're saying simple things, but a lot's going on under the covers, right? You're just using these little words, knowing that under the covers, it's doing so much for you. That's how you want to encapsulate those complexities. And we do the same thing with project generation. You're telling it just by name, I've got a tech stack, and here's the name. I want to use this one, not that one, this one. Here's the name of my model that I've already, I've either shared with the platform or I want it to load on the fly. And then you're providing things like, here's my Docker stuff, right? Here's where I want you to put the image. Here's my credentials. Here's my GitHub stuff, just in case you want us to push the project that we generated somewhere. Here's all my Axon stuff, right? The port, and I am using the server. Like you're just kind of touching on simple things with simple text, truth, falses, names of things. I'm using H2 versus Postgres. I'm using MongoDB as the event store. All those things now sit in a property file. So now that I can instrument those there, knowing that when I hit a button, it's all going to get taken care of, right? So from a new developer's perspective, again, I think predictability is important. So even if I was new, say I was not new to the organization, but I'm new to this team, knowing that they're using this tool, I already know what to expect, right? I've already seen this instrument panel before. I already know when I touch and turn these things, here's what I can expect for the output. And you're right. So I've been in many places where they'll just say, hey, go to here's the Git repo, do a clone on everything, and you can get started. And it's like, are you kidding me? Like I don't know. Oh yeah,
And
and look
good
at the
luck if
Java
the
docs too. It's like I don't know what anything is.
and good luck if the README file is not even completed, or then you're completely lost. Good
Yeah,
luck with everything.
it's usually the generator README file, right? It's like, okay, I finished reading you 10 seconds. Like so to your point, and by the way, I had never really even thought of this, so that's why I'm like enamored by you thinking on this. But again, having my background, that was the purpose. It's like I can't keep going from engagement to engagement, having to relearn everything. So if we can provide the source of what's going to become predictable, we're more efficient. I can bid on the job and charge less because we're generating versus working, time material,
Exactly.
and it just makes it easier. So I will tell you the following: any situation where they've asked us to come in and do work, if we can't use the tool, we can't. Like you can't build a house with a hammer now, right? Maybe a nail gun, but there's some tools you just have to have now, and I think I'm hopeful at some point. That's how I do see event sourcing becoming that at some point in the future. And I also am hopeful that project generation is the same way. It's like, you know what, my grandsons will tell me, hey, you know what we do now? I'm like, oh yeah, we used to do that by hand, but now you guys just what? Yeah, we're just talking to a microphone and suddenly the project just gets started for us. I'm like, yeah, that's cool. I say, your grandfather was part of that. He goes, yeah, I know you weren't. I'm like, okay. Right.
Oh, that's amazing. That is fantastic. And I think it really is important because again, that first step of generating a project, especially if you don't know all of the tools that are involved, the ins and outs of it, it's just there's so much involved that it can take months to get something started. But if you can use this generator and just get going with your actual important coding that you need to do and getting your application started and getting to the really cool stuff that you wanted to do with it instead of worrying about, oh my gosh, what kind of dependencies do I need in here, how do I structure the application. I mean, you already take care of that, you're good to go, just go have fun with it, which is really really important. And I'm sure a lot of people don't want to deal with all of the nitty gritties at the beginning. They just want to go and make something really cool
They're
and
there.
interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and you know what's funny, Sarah, and you're so right to even point that out. One of the things I try to explain is like it's not just the stuff that works, right? Okay, so you go from making a request to create something and it figures it out and somehow it ends up in the database. I'm like, what is baked into these templates are the problems that we found along the way, right? That you don't need to do anymore, right? For instance, you can't use this version of this jar file with that one, otherwise it'll have a runtime exception. Like all these, so we don't just, by the time we have a tech stack ready to use, it's already got baked in, lessons learned, right?
Right.
Things that we saw out there in the industry where somebody, either the vendor, Axon, for instance, would recommend doing something a certain way. It's already in there, right? So by the time you get to the place where things are generated, it's not just the things are functional, but all those other things, the bugs, the stuff that you would have run into otherwise, they're just gone. So
Yeah.
hopefully, right, if this becomes wildly popular, the number of questions people have about Axon will go down, right? They won't have,
Exactly.
right, that discussion.axonic.io, right? There'll be crickets up there. They'll be like, hey man.
We got this figured out. All the mistakes that I made, you don't have to make them again. Only if you could generate an application from parenting.
That's right.
Don't make the same mistakes that my
Don't
friends
make the
did
same
so that
mistakes
you
we
can be
made, and we
better.
make them. I mean, what's funny is if I could sit and document what it takes to build a tech stack, you'd realize, I mean, by the time we have something we're ready to use and or publish, we've probably generated close to 500 to 1,000 times, right? Because
Wow.
it's just again, it's new to us, right? I'm
Yeah.
new. We're stepping to Django and Ruby on Rails. I've never done Ruby on Rails, so how are you going to provide a tech stack on Ruby on Rails? Well, guess what? By the time you're done with it, you're going to be real good at Ruby on Rails. But what you're going to discover is that you weren't really good in the beginning, and you're going to have to go through probably a few hundred iterations to get to a place where people who are really good at it look at what you generated and say, yeah, that's really good. That makes sense. I could use that.
Like, good
Because that's
job.
the goal, right? Like we have dissension. We always have dissension, right? Somebody will say, well, I can write that as fast as you can generate. I'm like, okay, that's impossible. but let's get over that for a second. The next thing they'll say is, well, that's not the way I would have written it. So again, we had to make sure that these tech stacks weren't closed and that people could edit them before they generate. Otherwise, we just run into all the problems. So my experience has been helpful from getting, like I said, from getting yelled at and or talked down to. You can once you get over that, you can figure, hey, how do I avoid that? And you avoid that by sucking up your pride and making sure that the platform has enough flexibility to address all kinds of issues up front.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's really it takes a different kind of way of looking at it, right? You have to completely let go of your ego and just say, okay, just bring it. Show me all the things that I did wrong, everything that I
Yeah,
messed
because
up,
what you're doing
and
is you're
just not taking it
abstracting.
personally, right?
Yeah, right. You don't take it personally. And what you're doing is you're listening to all these opinions, right? And you're trying to come up with an abstraction to resolve them all, right? And you can't all of them. Some of them are just obscure. They're the outliers, right? But if you took it as a bell curve and you said, you know what, I've heard that thing enough times now, I have to consider it in the platform. I think that's really where we are today. That's sort of the beginning thinking of it. It wasn't just being fixated on Java because I like you were doing it in Java. And who cares about NoSQL? We're just going to persist to relation to it. It's like, you know what? We have to maintain the flexibility to incorporate multiple languages and multiple frameworks and all these other things. But more importantly, I think it's the design patterns
Mhm.
where when we've introduced something, is it possible that what we've done isn't going to be acceptable? And if the answer is not, again, they're usually amazed. They'll see what we generate and they'll say, well, I don't think that that's the way to approach that particular solution. I'll say, can I share a screen? I'll open it up.
Yeah,
I say, what do you think we should do? And I'll type it and I'll do it right there. And then hopefully it works because I have to generate it and it compiles. I say, this is what you're thinking. And that again, you're getting people who came to the table not with an agenda but real concerns. Because anytime you hear the word code generator, it makes people get a little sick to their stomach. So he said, well, how about application generator? I'm like, how about project generator? It's like, maybe you get rid of the word generator. It's like, okay, how about instantiator? So no matter what the word is, right, it's going to all come back to the fact that you guys generate code. It's like, okay, let's just stop. We generate code. That's fine.
yeah,
But before we generate it, we're going to let you take a look at what we do so we can make it the way you want it to. And
yeah.
that's been a huge learning part of it. So having the flexibility to adapt to those opinions and encapsulate those as solutions is really where we sit today. But yeah,
Mhm.
thank you for mentioning some of those things. That you're really
Of
perceptive.
course.
Because well, no,
I
and I
really
mean that
appreciate it.
sincerely. Because most people they're just so fixated on the end result part. The code. Hey, how many lines of code does that generate? I'm like, I don't know. It depends on the tech stack and how big the model is.
Yeah,
So they're fixated on numbers of lines of code and are you using this version of this library, those sorts of things. But you seem to be perceptive enough that actually the things we are focused on are soft that we don't mention, but they're extremely important.
yeah.
Extremely important. And don't forget
Thank
too, we have to use the output too, right? So when we generate, we have to use it too. So we're really sensitive to, is this stuff even any good that we're generating? And hopefully, others will find it
Yeah, and
is.
I think you guys do a really thorough job at quality control. You're constantly listening, and I think that's an important thing that sometimes is overlooked a little bit. That whole listening aspect of what is it that this user wants to have, how is the experience for the end user,
Mm.
and that's really really important. And I appreciate you listening and kind of looking at different ways of doing it and being flexible about it, because that's the key word, having flexibility. You're not married to what you're saying and this is my way, or if you don't like it, take the highway. That's not it. It's just let's work together. Just go through that process with a little bit more ease for everybody. Now, one of the things I do want to ask you, because we talked about it a little briefly before, is so we did come up with Axon Initializer a few months ago, and there are some things that do overlap with the project generator that you have created, but there are certain things that are completely different, and yours go a lot more into details of just end-to-end product, basically how you want your project to be generated from the beginning to the end, which the initializer doesn't quite do that. Now, in the future, and we're not making any promises here at all, because I don't like to overpromise and underdeliver anything, but there is that possibility of working with the two and sort of coming up with something that's even greater than the initializer itself and the generator itself. Or is it something that is not currently in the, I don't know, future planning?
Thanks for asking about that. So I would say that the short answer is if you don't have a model, you can't use the generator anyhow. So you should use the initiator, right? You should get, the sort of the dependencies, the build dependencies down, right? That, go to the tool, use it, select, tell it what you're doing, what your plans are, and let it go ahead and lay down the dependencies, right? And some of the other files that even if they're empty, you'll have them there, and you'll begin to get your project structure. You'll have that. That's a
Right.
start, right? You have to do it anyhow, so you might as well click a button and do that. If you have a model, right, and that took work to get, right? You got a model, you got one you trust and you like. Hopefully, maybe we helped you build it, or Axon helped you build it. Then you should consider using the tool, right? Like you're at that point, you've got so much context sitting in a file, right? Whether it's a YAML file, a JSON file, or some other file that maybe is more tuned to a modeling tool, that you should give it to something that can cheat and lay down the groundwork for you, right? Like it wouldn't make any sense not to. But to your point, I think that there's possibly just some natural synergy, even if it would just surface synergy between the two, because a lot of folks, they don't have a model, which is amazing, right? Think about it, right? This is an event, driven architecture, right? We're trying to advocate, domain driven design. We're talking about event modeling and a domain model, and they don't have a model. That's okay,
Right.
right? That's okay. That's fine. They just want to still get into doing something, right? So they could use our tool still with a sample model, just so they can see what it looks like. But then you're gonna have to go through and decompose and throw out half the stuff, because those aren't your things, right? You're not building, for that domain. But in that case, absolutely, you would use the initiator to get yourself started. So I think that
Yeah.
there's something there. I mean, I don't know what it is, but I think because they're both playing in the same space of getting something started, it would. I mean, the natural, the lever, the switch between the two is with or without an event model, right? That's really the difference between the two.
Yeah, and I really, really appreciate you mentioning the modeling and sort of planning ahead portion of it, because if there's somebody who just wants to play around with the idea of event-driven architecture, Axon framework, what have you, sure, the initializer is the quick route to take. If you do have some planning in advance, then of course the project generator is a better route to take. So lots of really wonderful things in the future, and I know you have some really cool things in the planning mode right now. And I know we talk on a weekly basis. Actually, I just popped into one of your talks today. I kind of invited myself a little bit.
I do like how you just showed up and like, hey, where did Sarah come from? I didn't see her last week. It's okay.
It's a running joke. I'm everywhere. No.
Everywhere. You are
But
everywhere. That's good.
yeah, it was really cool to hear some of the plans for the future, and I'm really looking forward to seeing more as we get this partnership tighten up a little bit and work on several different things. Are there any of the things in the planning mode that you'd like to share? Is anything confidential you don't want to do? That's okay too. But
Oh
I'm just
no,
curious
thank you.
what you have in plan.
Yeah, no, thank you for asking. So I think there's a couple of things. I think from a partnership perspective, it's still new, but we want to continue to prove ourselves to you as a partner, as well as to customers either in the pipeline or out of the pipeline, that what we're doing is really just trying to enable Axon, right? How do you get to use Axon? How do you get to use it faster, easier? How do you make decisions? How can we get more confident with the things that Axon's all about, right? The CQRS and all those great design concepts that are sitting in there. How do we get them there faster, right? So that's exciting to me. That's enough. And what we're going to continue to work on, and hopefully we can collaborate more with you guys, is just really on event modeling itself. There's no clear singular specification on what it is to model an event, right? What are you capturing for the data? What are you capturing, in terms of the model? So if we can do some of that together, right? Even if initially it's just in a text file, right? Then eventually it has some graphical UI to it. You're really going now end to end even better, right? Like the user's able to start to think about events in a modeling way. Right now, you may hold the sessions and you may have a bunch of yellow stickies and all these great things, but they still have to go from sort of a manual operation to take their thinking and event modeling and turn it into something else that's more consumable by the platform. So I think that's a part of it. We've been talking a while, honestly, about the decomposition of J2EE applications. So most places we step into, and Axon would know this, is that those applications are off limits because they're precious and they're sitting on infrastructure that's becoming obsolete, right? WebSphere is still here, WebLogic, JBoss. But if you can get your hands on decomposing those applications into microservices, that's gonna be a phenomenal thing to happen in the industry. And I think if you can get them moved over, I mean, they're already needing to be rethought, right? They're sitting in this particular container. How do you put them in another container? If we can, one of the things we're working on and doing some serious thinking around is, how can you do that in an automated way, right? So I can
Right.
step into an engagement. Somebody can point me to an application that's traditionally run in WebLogic, and it can be decomposed for the most part and
Mhm.
be put onto an Axon framework, right, running on Spring Boot. Like if you can start to automate that, then you start to have factory like refactoring of applications. That's going to be another way to sort of move people more quickly over to the Axon, because I think the automation piece and the generation piece, it 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 happens so quickly that it will alleviate a bunch of things, right? I mean, if it's a one for one in terms of the work, then you can complain about the complexity, right? This is too hard, too much. But when it's not one for one, right? When you're talking months to minutes, it's like, okay, well, I still think CQRS is a bad idea, but maybe I can like it better now, right?
Right.
Right? So I think us tackling, we're really focusing on. I'm glad that you asked. Really starting to focus more on, hey, how can we refactor applications? So we usually talk about new application development, but we've also got the ability to refactor. If somebody says, hey, there's a database over there, we can refactor out of that SQL into a domain model. They look at it and say, yeah, that's kind of right, or they'll touch it, and then we can spin up a new application on a different tech stack. And what that gives us the ability to do is quickly show them that you've got these ideas sitting in this old tech stack. What if we
Mhm.
put them in a new tech stack? We'll eventually get your application written over there, but meanwhile, other people can start using that new functionality, right? Like it's provisioned already as a microservice. Don't people need to look at customer and account? Yeah, they look at it in a million different ways in the company. Well, wouldn't it be great if we can start to sort of shrink that down and get consolidation in terms of those concepts? So us refactoring applications is as equally important as spinning up new ones as well.
Right. Exactly. And I'm so glad you brought up the topic of event modeling because that's probably hands down one of my very, very favorite things to do and talk about. And I'm very visual person, so just seeing it really helps, and talking about it really helps. Obviously, I like to talk to people, and so I think that's that's one of the cool things that that you are doing, and I'm so looking forward to seeing more and how that automation aspect of it can work and can help everybody to be able to even do more after the project has started.
Right.
How can we develop it more? How can we evolve it more? Which is something that's really interesting to me. So wow, a lot of great things coming up, a lot of wonderful things. I am really looking forward to seeing more, and I'm really hoping that I can get have a chance to talk with you again in the new year and come back and see what other new things are doing and what we're doing together as
Yeah.
partners. And yeah, really looking forward to all of that. So I really appreciate you taking the time to really go through some of the details of what you do and what we do together, and sharing all of those wonderful tools and ideas with me and everybody who's listening.
Yeah, no, thank you, Sarah. Thank you for the opportunity to talk. And yeah, I think as we
Absolutely.
turn the corner to the new year, we'll probably have a good number of customer success stories to talk about,
Yeah.
and love to be able to come back on and share those with folks as well. So thank you.
Absolutely, can't wait for that. So I hope you have a great rest of your evening and
Oh, you
talk to you
too.
soon, very hopefully. All right, take care.
Thank you, Sarah. Bye-bye.
Bye. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Steve. Please join me next time as I discover other really interesting and fascinating topics and talk with wonderful guests. Until then, have a great time and happy coding!